The future of Europe is unfolding as we speak, at least for the next 5 years. No surprise to see the hard bargaining for top jobs at the Commission, the EU Parliament, the European Central Bank have gone to extra time. The stakes couldn't be higher. Citizens know it. They turned out in greater numbers to vote in last May's EU elections. And between shades of populists and federalists, left and right, those who worry about Russia, China, the US, which has announced fresh trade tariffs, by the way, who to represent the continent for the next 5 years. We're getting breaking news on that score. What is fair? The power play runs deep between political rivals, blocs, and also amongst the 28 leaders themselves. Remember, each nation gets at least one commissioner. And that includes you, Britain, so long as you're still inside of the European Union when the horse trading's over. How legitimate will those new picks be today in the France 24 debate? We're looking at those top jobs. And with us, Nino Galletti, who heads the Paris branch of the Konrad Adenauer Institute think tank. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well Alexis Poulain, co-founder of The Modern World, the news website.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. Famke Krummüller, political and business consultants, Open Cities, is with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And Robert Frank, professor of history and international relations at the Sorbonne and the author of To Be or Not to Be European, The British and Europe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. First off, we should tell you they were supposed to reconvene at 11 a.m. and start fresh. They finally sat down at 4:30. It looks like that horse trading has gotten them somewhere. We've heard in recent minutes that the nominees are the current German defense minister, Ursula von der Leyen, to be the new president of the European Commission. That's the job to replace Jean-Claude Juncker. And the new president of the European Council, the chair, if you will, when you have those meetings of leaders, replacing Donald Tusk, would be Charles Michel, the Belgian. What's your first reaction, Famke?
They killed the Spitzenkandidat process by nominating
Explain the
Ursula von der Leyen. So the idea was that every European party in the European Parliament agreed on a common candidate, so across their parties from the different member states. And one of these candidates would become the next European Commission president. What has happened in the past, or last time 4 years ago, is that the candidate from the biggest party was supposed to become president of the Commission. Didn't happen now again. The idea was to introduce some type of democratic process at the European level and to have the Parliament not only approve but actually push forward their candidate. And well, let's say Parliament needs to approve this, but complicated.
Nino Galletti, when we woke up this morning, the person tipped to be the president of the European Commission was still the head of the Socialists, their Spitzenkandidat, their lead candidate, Frans Timmermans, the Dutch socialist. The Dutch first reaction is one of anger. Your thoughts? Is it unfair, this process where the 28 leaders...
Sometimes things are changing very quickly in politics. And so it's a surprise that Ursula von der Leyen will become now the president of the Commission. But I think she's well prepared. She was born in Brussels. She was growing up in Brussels because her father was Director General at the time in the 60s in Brussels. He was working with the European Community. And she speaks French fluently. And French told me once she speaks French with a Belgian accent.
more with a Belgian accent, a Walloon accent, if you will. How will she rate in comparison to Jean-Claude Juncker, who had his critics? Because on the one hand, seasoned politician, he'd been prime minister of Luxembourg for years. On the other hand, the LuxLeaks case is revealed while he's still there, and he seemed to represent a sort of a stodgy insider image of Brussels.
Well, I think it's important that President Macron wanted somebody who has experience in governing. Ursula von der Leyen started governing in 2003. She was Minister of the Families, Minister of the Social Issues. Now, since about 6 years, Minister of Defense. So she has really a big experience, and that will help the Commission.
At one point when the day began, we were wondering whether the Germans would get none of the top positions. Last time you came on the show, they were angling for all three of the big jobs, the Commission, the President of the European Parliament, and the ECB.
Well, that's another idea. In Germany, we had the tradition that these posts are going to the smaller countries, because as Germany is a really strong country, do we really need these posts? There are some people who say, no, it's not necessary. Well, no, evident. We have the President of the Commission, so we will try with her.
Alexis Poulain, your reaction to how this is unfolding?
Well, it's very undemocratic as the whole process. I mean, people are wondering why so few people are going to vote for the European election. You vote for a parliament, and then a few EU leaders decide who are going to be the top jobs. And if you look at the names, they can change the names, out of a hat, because they're all the same. They're interchangeable. It could be anyone at any post. The idea is that it's the same idea, it's the same orthodoxy, we're going in the same way. Europe is facing many crises: migration, ecological crisis, economic crisis. We got further coming, maybe. And what we have is the same people thinking the same things over and over again. We'll see what's going to happen. But remember, when Jean-Claude Juncker came in power, he said, this has to be a political commission or Europe is dead. Has it been a political commission the past 5 years? No, it wasn't. The migration crisis was fierce, and look where we are now. We got national populist leaders all over Europe, and they are now having a real power in Brussels.
So you would have liked to have seen
a change.
Somebody, a figure that was more known across the continent instead of Ursula von der Leyen?
I guess so. It's time to have someone who can be a leader, who can represent Europe when you have Donald Trump coming back with economic war, when you have China who wants to buy Europe, bit by bit with 5G and others. And when you have...
So one of those lead candidates, because there was Margaret Vestager, the Danish commissioner.
The Greens, or someone
there was
an
Franz
ecological
Timmermans.
Profile. These people are very old world. They will be the same over and over again. I can't see why they would have new ideas, fresh ideas, and how to face the crisis that we are facing right now.
There's another element in this mix: EU leaders nominating the current Director General of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde of France, to be the head of the European Central Bank, which is up for renewal next month.
Exactly. Well, that's what I said, interchangeable. They're the same. They are in Davos, they are in Bilderberg, they have the same ideas about the world. They say year after year that inequalities are rising, it's a threat to our democracies. But have they been acting over the past year? They've been in power for over 10, 20 years for some. They haven't done a thing for the trouble we are now facing. So I can't see. I'm not very optimistic. I say look at what's going to happen. But next, what we'll have is Italy with the debt, saying hey Brussels, I do what I want with my public money. We'll have France with debts again. So I think that's why we got Lagarde, because Macron wants to be safe on the ECB front. But it's not,
and she's not officially. She's not from his political family. Remember, she's from.
She's very compatible. Very compatible.
Yeah.
I think we just shouldn't forget that this hasn't been approved by the European Parliament.
Right.
So
exactly.
This is totally not a done deal. And I think that's the real question, because, as you've said correctly, many things have changed, and that change has now actually filtered through to the composition of the new European Parliament that was just elected in May. There is no clear majority, as we used to have the EPP, centre-right, and the centre-left, the socialists, be able to form a majority in a coalition. This is not possible anymore. So I think it's unclear whether these nominations will actually be accepted by the European Parliament.
So they've thrown a bone to the Social Democrats here, because the person to replace Federica Mogherini as the top EU foreign policy person would be the current Spanish foreign minister, Josep Borrell. Borrell, who is a socialist, and of all the socialists in Europe, it was the ones in Spain who did the best in those EU elections. Is that going to be enough for, in the end, the European Parliament to rubber stamp what's been decided behind closed doors in Brussels?
I think, in my view, the dilemma, let's say, that the European Parliament is facing right now is this idea that they will essentially, if they approve these nominations, will themselves vote down their own Spitzenkandidat process. And at the same time, they would vote down, for example, the first female president of the European Commission as well. So obviously, these are smart nominations to a certain extent, but I still don't think we should take it for granted that it actually goes through the European Parliament.
All right, the European Parliament convening right now in Strasbourg. We'll try to cross over to Dave Keating, who's there as soon as possible. But let me turn to you now, Robert Frank. Your thoughts on this, because all these calls for a more political Europe, more polarized. People were more interested. We had more people voting in the EU elections. What do you make of the initial, and again, as Famke rightly points out, these are nominations. This is not official yet. Your thoughts, though?
Well, my thoughts are the following. If you take Emmanuel Macron's idea at the beginning, I think he wanted to change things. He was maybe saying that the European Popular Party, the Social Democrat Party, they were always together. They had the majority. Nothing changed. Maybe the Central Party, the Liberals, will be able to change things because they gained some votes. That's why he was against Manfred Weber. He was in favor of Margaret Vestager, or why not Michel Barnier, who is Macron compatible. So he won because there was no Manfred Weber. At the end, if it's a defeat at the beginning for Angela Merkel, it's a success for Angela Merkel.
Yeah, because remember, we were saying Macron's the man with his wind in his sails. Merkel's a lame duck chancellor. She's already said it's her last term.
Yes.
He's going to call the shots, and he's not from the same voting bloc, right?
No, he's not. She's not. So, of course, she has Charles Michel, who is liberal and at the European Council. Ursula von der Leyen, one thing maybe is good, even if she's the old world, she's new. For the Europeans, I would say, not for the Germans. She's new, she has competence, she has skills, she has a sort of charisma. She has no problems like Juncker could have, I hope so.
No, that's actually not true. And okay. From the German perspective, that's actually one of the problems that you could think with this nomination, because she's one of the weakest links of the German government right now.
How so?
Weak minister because she's currently being investigated by a parliamentary committee in Germany because her ministry spent excessive amounts of money on consulting contracts.
Christine Lagarde also had problems.
Sure, yes. Exactly. So, and you could argue even from a democratic perspective that Germany is sending somebody, or Merkel sending someone that she doesn't want in Berlin anymore to Brussels. And I agree that she seems like a competent candidate, but politically she's weak right now in Germany.
Are you suggesting she's being kicked upstairs?
Kind of.
Do you agree?
That happens a lot in Brussels.
Yes. Not at all. No, in Germany, we have many people who say, well, we send people to Brussels because we don't need them anymore. But you have to send the strongest people to Brussels. And I think with Ursula von der Leyen, it's the case.
Mm-hmm. It's obviously a good compromise, right? Because she's very close to Merkel for sure. And
first woman ever to be president of the European Commission. In that respect, and picking up on what Robert Frank was saying, does that make her a fresh face in the eyes of Europeans who don't know her?
In that respect, yes. Only in that respect.
Only in that respect.
Because you could say, okay, that's a casting thing. But what the ideas behind and everything, what's on the table will be exactly the same.
One thing you have to understand is this process. It seems more diplomatic than democratic, okay? But it's difficult to do something else. Why? Because you have, of course, European democracy, but you have also national sovereignty. If it's so complicated, all that, it's because if everything was completely democratic, you would not have any national sovereignty. So each citizen has to choose. If you want more European democracy, why not? But you will have less national sovereignty. If you that's the problem of the balance between the two. That's why it's so complicated. That's why it's always compromise, and it's compromise much more difficult than maybe in the national framework.
Compromise much more difficult, and there's 28 of them. There could even be more in a near future. And we're going to now cross over to Brussels and dip in and listen to the German Chancellor.
And with my colleagues of the PPE to find a solution, a fair solution, for Franz Timmermans and Manfred Weber. We haven't managed to do so. This has to do with the situation of the parties today. And today we have submitted a proposal to the European Council, which I support. That is to say, Donald Tusk, with the European Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt, will consult the political parties to see how in future we can avoid this kind of situation. So we will be discussing this with the European Parliament, because this situation with the Spitzenkandidates resulted in a situation where we were unable to confirm the appointments. We must not be in this situation again, because these personalities for weeks and for months have been campaigning, and this situation is unacceptable. However, we have found a solution. Therefore, we have managed to appoint a president, a woman, president of the European Council, Ursula von der Leyen, and there was one abstention, my abstention. If there hadn't been unanimity, so there was no opposition to this appointment of Ursula von der Leyen as President of the European Commission. It has also been proposed that Franz Timmermans and Margrethe Vestager should be Vice Presidents of the European Commission. We have agreed to designate Charles Michel as the future President of the European Council. This was a unanimous vote. And then we recommended better balance in the European Parliament, that the Socialists should occupy the presidency during the first 2 years of the European Parliament, and then the PPE would occupy the presidency of the next 2 years. And this proposal, Manfred Weber would be the choice of the PPE. As regards the recommendation on the new president of the European Central Bank, for the first time it will be a woman, Christine Lagarde. This decision was a unanimous decision, and we will, of course, have to defend these appointments in front of the European Parliament. We will do so as members of the European Council. We believe that these proposals are valid, and regarding the representative of the EU Foreign Affairs, we have proposed the Socialist Minister, the Spanish Minister, Josep Borrell. I think it is important to say that today we have come to an agreement altogether, and it's important because it's important for our future work. It will be crucial. Everybody has made compromises. Once again, the European Council has shown that it is capable of reaching agreement. Given the various situations which exist across the EU, the political situations in Europe are very diverse. I think it's very positive that we have managed to find a solution, and within the European Council we have shown that we are capable of reaching an agreement. I'd like to thank two colleagues who attended the European Council for the last time, Theresa May and Verstappen, who participated in the European Council for over 10 years. I've always worked with them very well, and I'd like to thank them. Thank you. And now let's take your questions now. Mr. Becker of the Spiegel magazine. Madam Chancellor, you have just said that none of the heads of the lists managed to achieve the choice So do you think the Spitzencandidate system is finished? We said to ourselves that the heads of lists should continue to play a role in the future. But as I said in yesterday's press conference, the question is, within this European constellation, who is the head of the list for the European Commission position? It's not easy to define. Is it necessarily the strongest political grouping, or is it the person who could win the highest number of votes, which doesn't necessarily mean that it will be the same person who will be chosen by the European Parliament. That's the reason why the European Council has indicated that it wished in future to try and set better rules in this regard. We don't want to put an end to the concept of Spitzencandidate, but we need to think about the way we could rethink this concept. We have seen this time that in practice it isn't necessarily easy, and that's the reason why we need more democracy. So there are transnational lists. Another possibility would be to have transnational lists with direct universal suffrage, to see how many votes each candidate would have, each list leader would have. And we need to think about all this. Generally speaking, I don't want to put an end to the Spitzencandidate principle, but it hasn't been very useful. And the head of a list is not necessarily the person as the right person for the presidency of the European Commission. So I'm not going to repeat what I've already said. We must look to the future now. Mr. Price.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel reacting and pleased with the lineup that's come out from this European Council for the next 5 years at the top executive posts. Again, if you're just joining us here on France 24, it's a German to be president of the European Commission, the current defense minister, Ursula von der Leyen. She would be seconded at the council, the president of the council, the one who would replace Donald Tusk, would be Charles Michel of Belgium. We would have as well as the new president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde. And at this point in time, the foreign policy chief, the one to replace Federica Mogherini, that would be Spain's Josep Borrell. No word yet on who the president of the European Parliament would be, although we just heard Merkel say what is being touted when they vote, and the voting starts 9 a.m. Wednesday in Strasbourg at the new parliament, would be a sort of a power-sharing system where the socialists would get the gavel for the first 2 years and then hand it over to the center-right EPP bloc of which Merkel hails. Alexis Poulain, we heard Angela Merkel defending tooth and nail that principle of the lead candidate, the Spitzenkandidat. We've even now all grown used to using the German word. And there she was saying, well, maybe it's a good idea, but maybe it wasn't ripe yet.
Yeah, I think this is done. They completely overpassed it. And it said, well, if we can manage this way, why we would try in the future to put back the Spitzencandidate if we don't have transnational list. And by the time we have transnational list...
Transnational list, just to be clear for our viewers, transnational list for the European elections.
Yes, for the parliament. And then that would make sense to have Spitzencandidate. But we're far from this, and we're far from even Spitzencandidate as we've seen today. So clearly, it's just a matter of struggle of power between France and Germany for the top jobs, and then other countries that are trying to get in and find a way. Who's looking at the big picture? Who's looking at what's going to be the future of Europe, the strategy? As I said, we should have as the head of the Commission a green figure, someone who will be tackling climate change for real, not someone who would just be listening to lobbies from the industry and saying, oh, we have time, because we don't have time anymore.
We can call up the makeup of the new European Parliament that came out of those elections back in May, and we could see that in that makeup, the center-right bloc, of which Ursula von der Leyen hails, is still the biggest vote-getter on in number of seats, 181. The Greens that you mentioned there, Alexis Poulain, they surged, but they only got 75 of those seats. They're not even in. They're not even in second place.
You look at population in Europe; they are very aware of the urgency, the emergency of climate change and tackling this. And it's not just about seats; it's about public opinions. It's about people of Europe. It's not just about this big project for banks and arm makers.
So Nino Galletti, all the horse trading we've seen, has it boiled down to this Franco-German arm wrestling match in the end?
No, you call it horse trading. Chancellor Merkel used the word balance. You have to find a balance, so you have to make compromises. And that's normal. That was always such in European Union. And if you have 28 member states, you have to find compromises. And there you have a compromise between countries of the East and of the West, of the South, of the North. You have compromises between the parties. You have compromises between women and men. So you have to find a balance, and that's hard work.
Geographically, when you look at those, I mean, obviously there's going to be more commissioners' names, and there are big posts still to come when they fill out those commission posts. But your thoughts on this, Frank?
No, I agree. I was going to ask the same question: where are the candidates from the East? I guess what did happen is that it was the Eastern countries that shut down Timmermans because he had been quite critical towards them, and they agreed with Ursula von der Leyen. So obviously they had their say. But it's true that at this stage it doesn't look like they did get any of the top jobs.
They didn't get any of the top jobs so far. Of course, there's still big ones still to come. You said this is all to be ratified by the European Parliament. Your reaction when you see they've offered this compromise whereby Timmermans is a consolation prize, we'll get that gavel, it seems, for the first 2 years of the European Parliament session.
Yes, I guess as I said, for the European Parliament, it will always be a dilemma voting in favor of a nominee that hasn't surged from the famous Spitzenkandidat process. But then what is the alternative? Because even amongst themselves, they don't have a clear majority. There's not even a grand coalition between the centre-right and the centre-left. So they themselves need to also figure out what they want and which candidate or which nominee is able to actually get a majority.
Could we see some of the names rejected by the European Parliament?
The European Parliament only needs to approve the European Commission president. Even though this is being handled as a package, they have no say on the ECB nor on
by the way it looks, I mean, if you have the votes of the EPP and the Socialists, Ursula von der Leyen, that's a done deal, right?
Yes.
Well, in theory, only the Socialists and only the EPP is not a majority. No. So you need the Liberals or the Greens.
That's the big change of the elections of 2019. Before, why did the Spitzenkandidat system work in 2014? Because just what happened before, the two parties had the majority. And because they don't have the majority, that's why they didn't manage the Spitzenkandidat system. But I understand why Merkel is quite satisfied. If she doesn't have the Spitzenkandidat, she has a very good balance for the two main parties, which have not anymore the majority.
And her own defense minister as the next president of the European Commission.
EPP, two top jobs, Ursula von der Leyen and Lagarde. Socialist, if I understand, 2 post jobs. And in 2 hours and a half, EPP will have 3 top jobs. So it's a good bargain for the EEP, who had a revolt against Angela Merkel. So Angela Merkel is satisfied, but on the other hand, EPP, who revolted against Angela Merkel, is the winner.
And if it goes
even if the EPP declined.
Nino Galletti, if it goes to script in 2 years' time, we'll see a CDU president of the European Commission and a CSU president of the European Parliament. Your thoughts on that?
Why not? But we are not talking about CDU and CSU, we are talking about EPP. And so this is a success not only for Merkel, it's a success for the European People's Party, I think.
Yes.
Is it too many Germans in top jobs, though?
I don't think so. Are there too many Germans here in the round? I don't think so, no.
And we still
Never.
have Zellmeyer at the European Commission as well. Another top job.
Apparently his days are counted.
I mean, you would think so with all these Germans around.
We'll see how that goes. Nino Galletti spoke of balance, and part of the balance is this inaugural session of the European Parliament included some oldies but goodies among the opening day theatrics, the session beginning with the European anthem, Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And as always, there you have them playing the saxophone. There was a singer as well. Nigel Farage and consorts then turning their backs when they heard the music. Yes, the leader of the Brexit party's back. He claims he hopes to be gone by October the 31st. You kind of had the sense, though, that he's still very much involved in the proceedings.
That Mr. Franz Timmermans is being talked about as Jean-Claude Juncker's replacement. He is a fanatic. You know, he wants to crush the nation state. He wants a United States of Europe. He's a very dangerous man, in my opinion. And I know there's huge pressure coming on Theresa May to vote for him. And I think, actually, given that we're supposed to be leaving, the Prime Minister ought to abstain.
Robert Frank, is he right? Should the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland abstain in the voting?
I think there was one dangerous man, it's Nigel Farage. He's dangerous for the United Kingdom. Because we're all speaking of Europe. We don't speak enough of United Kingdom, which is not united anymore. The Brexit is able, it's not true of course, is able to destroy the United Kingdom, which exists since the beginning of the 18th
when you saw
century.
those images, when you saw those images today of, on the one hand, Farage and his consorts turning their backs during Ode to Joy, on the other hand, we had the Liberals wearing these yellow, I forget what it said on them, but it was a message in support of Stop Brexit. There you go. That they had. Do you have the sense that come October 31st they really will be gone?
Well, there's a big risk of that, yes. Because everything depends of the union. Will the union stay united as it was behind Michel Barnier facing the Brexit? If they stay united, yes, the 31st October there will be a no deal. But we don't know what's going to happen because is Boris Johnson able to stay Prime Minister once he will be nominated by 2.5% of the electorate? Will the Parliament allow him to make the no deal without voting it? It's possible because if he does nothing, it goes automatically to the no deal. But the Parliament
He'd have to suspend Parliament.
But the Parliament voted against the no deal. Excuse me.
Yeah. So we could have a constitutional crisis in the UK.
It's possible too. It's completely possible. Everything is crazy because what's important for the Conservatives, it's the party, the Conservative Party. Nigel Farage is a danger for the Conservative Party, so everything is done to make possible that the Conservative Party survive. But the problem is not the Conservative Party, it's Britain. The real problem is the United Kingdom.
This is a domestic argument that's bleeding into the proceedings and Nino doesn't like the term horse trading, but the balancing act that's going on because you have these UK MEPs that may or may not be there after October the 31st, and that may or may not weigh on the decisions.
Yeah, completely. I mean, this is all up in the air, and we're waiting for Britain to get its act together. It's horror. Europe is being held hostage by this whole Brexit process. Also, we said we have a united front, the continent, but we can't just say, "Oh, just leave with no deal."
All right. So let me ask you the question: the next 5 years with the UK in. what will Europe look like? With the UK out, what will Europe look like?
Well, I can say, but it would be very different. I mean, we will have to look at, if you look at the European army, for example, we will have to find a deal with Britain if it's really leaving, because it's one of the biggest army with the French army. So we
that's
can't
not
just...
that's not difficult.
Yeah, well,
that's not difficult.
But so we can have many deals on many not difficult
many things
issues,
of European security and European defense can be outside the European Union.
Yeah.
You have two couples, the Franco-German couple, it works sometimes well, sometimes not so well.
Did
and you
work
have
very well
the
together.
Anglo-French couple for the security, and that will stay anyway. Of course, it could be maybe more complicated. But I'm not sure that there will be a big change, even if there's a no deal in the other matters.
Let's get reaction to these nominations from Strasbourg. Dave Keating, our correspondent, joins us there. Dave, this idea of a power sharing of the gavel with first the Socialists, then the EPP. How's it going to go down with the 700 plus MEPs who met for the first time behind you?
Well, since this package was first leaked out of Brussels and people started hearing about it here, I would say it wasn't incredibly popular, but in particular, it's those center-left PES MEPs who really, really hate this, because this is a real slap in the face for the S&D. They are basically just keeping what they had before. They had the high rep position before, Federica Mogherini from Italy. All that's really changed here in terms of the party makeup is that the European Council president will now go from being EPP to a liberal, but everything else stays the same. The ECB president is EPP, the European Commission president is EPP. So the EPP did kind of manage to cling on to power here, and people here are not so happy about it. Now, I think they were getting word over there in Brussels that people here were not so happy with this package, and I suspect that this move of basically giving the parliament as a gift the ability to pick its own president, that was really the surprise here, because ordinarily the European Parliament president position is one of these positions involved in the, dare I use the phrase, horse trading. And they've just set precedent by saying we will no longer have this be part of the negotiations. European Parliament, congratulations, you can pick your president yourself, the assumption.
We heard Angela Merkel say that there was this plan afoot so that it would be two years for the socialists and then 2 years for the center right. That's not a done deal, is what you're saying?
Well, that's a requirement. So it's a requirement to share the term between two different presidents, and it's always been the case that it's one person from the S&D and one person from the EPP. So that wouldn't change anything either. Donald Tusk in his press conference was also saying that he would suggest, they're being very careful here not to tell the European Parliament what to do, but he would suggest that the first president be from the center-left, from the S&D. But essentially, this is just the same arrangement that they had before. Now, Tusk also is hoping that the European Parliament president will get around the lack of geographic diversity here. All four of these people are from Western Europe. So he suggested in his press conference that maybe the Parliament should pick someone from Eastern Europe as its president. But again, they're being very careful to say this is entirely your call to the Parliament.
All right, many thanks for that live update from Strasbourg, Dave Keating there. And your reaction, Famke?
I mean,
have they just rearranged the deck chairs? That's kind of the way Dave is describing it.
How generous of the European Council to leave it to the European Parliament to pick its own president, I guess. But yes, it's true that it would give them the choice whether they might pick somebody from the East to balance that out. The fact that all these other nominations are candidates from Western Europe. And as he said correctly, it wouldn't change anything in terms of the power balance, really. And we'd still have the S&D.
Could we, and again, we can perhaps call up that chart that shows the makeup of the incoming parliament, and it's more splintered than it was. Could we see a surprise?
It depends, as I said, again, what's really difficult to judge this time, what will happen in terms of for what type of candidate would we have a majority, given that we have 3, if not 4 parties involved. So the main 2, including the Greens and the Liberals. So depending on...
Yeah, have a look there. And we see, if we look at it, this makeup, at this point in time, again, is there any formula under which, well, they're not going to be taking their marching orders from the European Council? Nino Galletti?
Well, as you see, the EPP is the major party, the major force in the European Parliament. So I think it's natural that they will keep the post of the President of European Parliament. And in former times, it was so that this mandate was split in two. So the first 2.5 years, there was one from EPP coming, and the other 2.5 years, that was a socialist who was President of European Parliament.
I mean, I guess this time what is different is that the Greens and the Liberals do have a voice, because if they don't approve whatever the deal is between the EPP and the S&D, there won't be a majority. So that they do have much more leverage than they did in the previous parliament.
Did Emmanuel Macron sell out the lead candidate of the Liberals, Margaret Vestager?
Well, he got Christine Lagarde now. I guess that was the deal that he made for the French.
How's that going to go down, Alexis Poulain?
All down to the parliament. I don't know. Clearly, it's all, you don't want to use horse trade, but that's what it is. Really, it's all about, here's my party, it's what I want. Let's share the world, Europe together. But nobody is really thinking about the big picture again. That's my whole thing. This is not preventing Europe for further crisis. Honestly, it's the same old process with the same old people. And it's not going to help.
All right, if we turn back the clock a little under 24 hours, when they came out of a bleary-eyed meeting, it was with an eye to EU enlargement candidates, Albania, Montenegro, Serbia, Macedonia, Turkey. It's going to be one of the big questions for this incoming executive, that Monday's inability to find an initial compromise, prompted some sharp words from France's president.
Within this context, I'm also more than sceptical about all those who try to tell us that the future of Europe is about a new enlargement, when the 28 of us can't reach an agreement. Once again, I will strictly refuse any enlargement before the functioning of our institution is profoundly reformed, so that there is a spirit of seriousness.
So, Robert Frank, we heard Angela Merkel, she got over the Spitzenkandidat now that there's a German as president of the European Commission. Is Emmanuel Macron going to be more conciliatory in his tone now that it's going to be a French woman who is head of the European Central Bank?
More conciliatory in which field?
Well, when it comes to, we can have those EU enlargement discussions now. We can continue with the same system.
I think he will be very firm. I think it's a French tradition to be firm on enlargement, even if France gives up. It depends, of course, on the president. Chirac was for the enlargement, just like the British. It's quite simple. Europeans who are for the enlargement don't want to deepen Europe. And people who want to deepen Europe are against the enlargement. And of course...
So the bigger Europe is, the more watered down its powers are.
Exactly. And that's the lesson we see a few days. It was very difficult to have the nomination for the top jobs. If we are 30, 32, etc., it will be worse. First of all. Second of all, Brexit, if it comes, even if the British come back maybe in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe they'll come back.
Years.
But anyway, if you have that, it means that Europe has some problems. So you have to solve the European problem before a future.
Nino Galletti, do you agree with Emmanuel Macron in his words there?
Well, I don't agree, but it's a difference between Germany and France. For Germans, it is obvious that this gap which you have on the Balkan, which the European Union has on the Balkan, has to be closed. And if there are coming 2, 3, 4 more states into the European Union, so it's not that important. But the French...
It won't water it down further, the powers. It won't make it more difficult to reach agreements like we saw.
Well, yes, it's Europe has changed. In former times, there were 12 or 15 member states. Things were easier. Today, we have more, but that's Europe. The European Union is on the base of Europe. And
it's one vision of Europe.
Yes, sure.
I mean, we've got
that's our vision of Europe.
The European Union as it is, I mean, it's not dealt that we have to expand until Russia.
Or the secret is that you have this two-speed Europe, right?
Yeah, that's Circle Europe. I mean, it's been there on the table forever. And look at what actually we have. We have the Eurozone. It's not for everyone. We have other agreement with Turkey, for example, who's not in, but we have a lot of commercial agreements. So there's many ways to enlarge Europe, not just membership. So why would you have more members when it can't work at 28?
But you have to invent these ways.
Yes. Well, some exist already, but they're mainly economic. But yeah.
I guess it depends to what extent you accept that you have multi-speed or as you say, concentric circles Europe. And I guess the more member states are in it, the more it will tend towards that direction. A couple of years back, that was unacceptable, but it has now become more and more accepted that that's not necessarily a bad way, but just a pragmatic way forward. I mean, with the Eurozone, as you said, Britain has opt-outs forever, Denmark as well. We've had it for a long time.
One final question for you, Famke. We're running short on time. When you look at the biggest challenges facing the European Union, Alexis pointed out the environmental one. There's also the trade challenges, right? With, on the one hand, China, on the other hand, the United States more and more. The security challenges with Russia. You have Iran. The current nominated lineup, is it up to the task?
I guess if you look at Ursula von der Leyen, she comes from the defense ministry. So on that front, she has many enemies in Germany to how she handled defense, but she has also a really good track record in forging compromise and actually doing deals. I guess more importantly, what has happened over the past few days has shown again the problem of how united is Europe. Do they really speak with one voice? I think it will just have been 48 hours or maybe 3 days, and it will get better again, let's say. But Europe really needs to act, especially with regards to trade, and China really needs to act in a coherent way and with one voice in order to have...
With one single voice.
Influence.
Famke Krummeler, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Alexis Poulain, Robert Frank, Nino Galletti. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.